So the next thing that we need to focus on are our priorities. So we're assuming that we have an annual strategy, that we have annual initiatives, that we have goals for the future. And then for our next most critical meeting is to set priorities at a quarterly meeting. So this is our quarterly meeting, the first of which will be at your annual strategy day. And then you have another 3 quarters where you have quarterly meetings and bring the leadership team together in order to plan out those priorities. So going back to our cadence, we've got our annual 1 or 2 days, maybe off-site, maybe split up into different time periods if that works for you. And then we've got our quarterly, which is a half to 1 day where we set priorities and targets. Now, priorities and targets are different things. I'm going to come back to that. So our annual planning day is all about strategic thinking and the outcome from the annual planning day. What you have to come away from an annual planning day, whatever work goes into it and whatever you discussed, you must come out of that annual planning day with annual initiatives. So you have to develop initiatives for the year. You might also work on a longer term strategy as well, but the key outcome has to be the annual initiatives, because that's what you're going to execute against for the year and what you're going to bring back into focus every time you come back into the room for a quarterly planning day. The outcome is planned out priorities and new targets. Now, a word on priorities and targets. Priorities are strategically aligned with your annual initiatives. Targets, however, are about performance. The way to think about priorities is if you think about a game of Monopoly. We all know how to play Monopoly, right? So we all understand Monopoly. So simple approach in Monopoly is you obviously want to accumulate property, and then you want to build, right? You want to build a house. And we all know that the first objective is to build a house. And what do you want to do? You want to get 4 of those houses, because we know that 4 houses equals a hotel. And that's kind of the way that we play the game. We play it incrementally. We're building up. We want 4 houses makes a hotel. 4 houses makes a hotel. And some people approach quarterly planning like that. They say, well, the year's broken up into 4 quarters, so we'll just take each quarter as it goes and we're going to build our hotel. But you should not do your quarterly planning like Monopoly. Yes, 4 quarters make up a year, but you start with the year. You have started with your annual initiatives. Your goal is not to build a house. Your goal is to build the hotel. And if you plan it out starting with the hotel, then you can start to figure out what the quarters need to look like in order to achieve your annual goal. And the fact is that it doesn't always look like 4 identical houses. If you start chipping away at it just 1 house at a time, you get into Q2 and that's your busy season and you couldn't really put any work into doing anything in Q2. You start Q3 and you're 1 house behind, you're not going to build your hotel. You start with the end in mind. So this is about starting with the focus that you're building a hotel and carrying that vision throughout the year, and then figuring out what needs to fall into each quarter. And most of that figuring out should be done at your annual planning day. You've got your year goal. How's that going to look throughout the year? Well, we know that we don't get a lot done in February, March, and April. And so you start looking at how that is going to lay out as the year goes on. Then what you do is you come together each year to plan it out in more detail and obviously review where you're at. But the goal is always to get the hotel. So your quarterly priorities are about creating something. And what you're creating is a strategic change initiative. A strategic change initiative that is tied to your annual initiative. So whatever your annual initiatives are, that is going to get broken down. Your hotel still gets broken down into houses. So you're creating a strategic change initiative that is aligned with what is in your strategy. It's aligned with what is point B, what is in that future. Perhaps it's on your gap map if your gap map is for the next 1 year. And you're still planning very much for it to accumulate. And what I mean there is that each quarter's priority is building on the previous quarter and will be built on in the next quarter to roll up to reach that hotel. Because what people will so often do, what I see companies make a mistake in quarterly planning, is they come into the room and the reason why their priorities fail is because they're solving small problems that have come up that quarter or maybe even just come up that week. And they've taken their eye off the long-term plan. It takes a year to build the hotel. And sure, there might be fires that you need to put out as you go through. But what you want your team to understand is we're building the hotel. And if there are problems on the way, then we'll still have to put in the extra effort and time to solve those problems. If you use your quarterly planning to solve problems, then it's a waste of time, energy, and resources that should be spent on reaching your long-term goals. And what I see so often in companies is they use their quarterly planning to do some pet project like revamping the sales dashboard interface. that really could have just been assigned to one person, get it done in your spare time. It's not the most important thing. We're building a hotel. Now, we also, at our quarterly planning days, so we'll set these quarterly priorities, these strategic change initiatives, but we will also look at our performance over the past quarter. And so we will set new targets for performance. So performance targets are improve something. Quarterly priorities are create something. Performance targets are improve something. So we want to increase performance across the business as well. And again, it's a mistake of quarterly planning to not see that the priority, which is around the hotel, is different from improving performance. If people just set priorities of saying we need to improve our profit, or we need to improve our margins, or we need to improve some part of the business, again, that's not the main role of the quarterly planning session. The main role of the quarterly planning session is to set priorities that align with the year goal, with building the hotel. So the performance target is very much about still improving performance. We want to set new goals for the quarter, and those goals will be in a whole bunch of areas. It could be quality, it could be efficiency, it could be revenue, it could be profit. It could be improving our customer satisfaction. It could be improving loyalty. It could be improving retention. It could be any number of things that you still want to set a target around improving. Of course, every part of your business you are looking at always improving, but an improvement goal is different from a strategic priority that is accumulating to build your hotel. So each quarter when we meet, when you bring your leadership team together, you want to plan out a priority that is strategic and driving you towards point B in the future. And also you want to review how you're performing as a business and set new targets. Of course, you want revenue to be greater, you want profits to be greater, you want quality to be improved. So what does the quarterly planning process look like? It's broken down into 3 steps. The first step is review. We have to take time to step back from the business, and this is why we bring the leadership team together off-site if suitable and possible, and we review the previous quarter. What we're primarily reviewing is our progress towards our end goal. We're reviewing how our priority in the previous quarter performed, which lets us know if we're on track or not, and we're reviewing what work still needs to be done. So our focus is very much on the end goal. So we start with review. And based on the review, we will ideate and come up with thoughts about what we should focus on, what we must prioritize this quarter in order to continue to make progress to reach our end goal. A lot of this will have been planned out at the start of the year, but by the end of the year, things are changing. So we still ideate what the most important thing is that we must focus on now. Sometimes the goal may have changed throughout the year as well. That's okay. The world is volatile and uncertain. But these things happen, the economy changes, the market changes, and so you may have to change course. So we review, we ideate, we come up with ideas. We don't jump to solution, we come up with ideas for what it is that we should be working on. And then we select. And the issue that businesses have with selection is they rush it. So I will have for you a structured process whereby we select the right goals rather than rushing it, rather than simply letting somebody say, well, I think that's what we go after. I have a method for you for actually planning that out. So we'll get into that as well. Once we select what it is that we should prioritize each quarter, we then plan it out in detail so that we can execute it against it and so that we can hold people accountable for that execution. Because if we leave the room saying that's what we're going to do, and we don't leave the room with a plan at the end of a quarterly planning session, what was the point? What you will find is you come back in a quarter later and everybody got busy and everybody has excuses and they haven't executed against the plan. And it's the plan that you want to hold up as an accountability tool in your weekly meetings and say, are we executing against the plan? Are we on track? So we'll come to the weekly meetings in a bit, but it's the plan that will be your main tool for running your weekly meetings. So we'll start with the review. What is it that we review? So the key thing that we want to be reviewing in our quarterly planning sessions is we want to review our strategy. And one of the easiest tools that I've given you today for you to go away and review that strategy with your team is the gap map. Your strategy is and what the thinking is behind your strategy and your work that you've done and your customer profile and the market research that you've done. But the gap map has got everything on one page. Where we are today, where we want to get to, the obstacles to reaching that, and your assumptions about the solutions that will solve that. So you can review your progress last quarter, your performance, and you can very much review last quarter's priorities. But the key thing that will show you where you are in your journey is the gap map, is the tool that we've worked on today. There's one more thing that companies like to review in their quarterly planning sessions, and that is various surveys and audits. Now, they could be surveys of staff, they could be surveys of customers. You've done a management audit today. It could be audits on various sort of functions and operational capability within the business. Companies love to sort of bring all of this information to their quarterly planning as well. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but I urge you to have some caution, because the more surveying and auditing you do, the more likely you are is to solve small problems in your quarterly planning and take your eye off the prize, is to take your eye off the hotel. So by all means, bring in that information, but I generally urge caution and maybe bring that information into monthly meetings instead. I would rather park that for a monthly meeting, or some of it even a weekly meeting. So from review, we ideate. We come up with a whole bunch of ideas, and from those ideas, we then have to select the ideas. And there are a number of ways that companies will go off track when selecting ideas. And the first way that companies go off track is they let the CEO decide. It's usually a bad idea. If you have managers, if you have a leadership team, if you have intelligent people in your business, ideate together, discuss the ideas, figure it out as a team. Don't just let the largest voice or the largest ego or the CEO decide. It is usually a recipe for error and perhaps potentially even disaster. Second thing that I urge you to avoid doing is chasing pet projects. This will often creep in if you do those surveys and audits, or you have sort of certain voices in the rooms that we really do need to redo that management dashboard. All these we need a new CRM system, we need a new sales tool, we need a new social media post, we need all these are pet projects. Don't let pet projects come into the sphere of quarterly planning. They should be solved through other mediums. This is about your eye on the bigger prize of what the year goal is. Another thing is don't vote. Consensus sucks. Your business is not a democracy. Consensus slows down decision making and usually produces weak, watered down solutions. I have a better method for you that I will show you in a moment. So I do not suggest voting, and voting is quite popular. And I'll show you a picture of what voting looks like in a moment, and it's messy. But most of all, don't rush. Do give this process some time. It is more important to choose the right solution, the right priority for the quarter, than it is to get out of the room and go home early. If you've dedicated a day or even a half day is enough for most small businesses, then take the time, don't rush. The conversation in the room is valuable. This is a picture taken in a leadership team of a company with about 50, 60 staff. There are a dozen people in this picture, but there are actually 20 people in the room. This is a crazy quarterly planning day. This is a quarterly planning day where the CEO believes that by bringing everybody in the room, they will get the best ideas. But the CEO is not listening to everybody's ideas in the room. That is the CEO. And what is going on in this picture is that they have been allowed, in inverted commas, to put their ideas on the post-it notes, and these post-it notes are going up rapidly on the glass window, and we're trying to indicate that the most popular idea will win. Consensus, voting, bad idea anyway. What is actually happening is that the CEO is moving things around and making the decision anyway, making all 20 people's time fairly redundant. 20 people, one day, that's 20 working days, and the CEO is going to make the decision anyway. That's why the CEO should not decide. If they are, don't bother having the meeting in the first place. Admit that you're a dictator, and that's the process you're going to run. But if you're going to run a true quarterly planning session and bring in the bright minds that you are paying for their wisdom and skills, there are better ways to do it. And the way I encourage you to do it is to take a wall, a whiteboard, a window, and divide it into 4 quadrants, a classic 2x2 matrix. And the horizontal here represents impact. What is the impact going to be of this priority amongst other priorities? But the interesting thing about measuring for impact here is we're not looking for the positive impact, we're looking for the negative impact if we don't do it, because humans are terrible at estimating the positive impact. Because whoever's pet project or preferred solution it is will presume that the impact is astronomical, it's off the charts, and other people will be much more conservative, and even the average won't be a good representation. However, if you get a group of smart people to estimate the negative impact, if shit hits the wall, if we don't do this, what will the pain be if we don't pursue this priority over others? You will find much greater alignment. So it is a more effective decision-making question to say, what's the negative impact of not doing this, rather than what's the positive impact of doing this? Because you're measuring the negative impact against competing ideas for priorities. And the vertical axis is what's the risk of this actually happening? What's the risk of the worst case scenario panning out? Because sometimes the negative impact might be huge. Let's say you're planning for dealing with the next pandemic. Well, obviously the negative impact is high, but, and you may have differing views on this, probably the risk is pretty low. So although it's got the highest negative impact, if it were to happen, the risk, the chance of it happening is small. It's not zero, but you know what? We're going to park it this quarter. And so with this 2x2 matrix, it's not a classic 2x2 matrix in the sense that you don't automatically choose the top right box, because it might be that something that has a much higher risk of happening far outweighs something with a greater negative impact that has a lower risk, or vice versa. And all of that is conversation that you have to drive with your leadership team. So you've ideated, you've come up with your ideas for what you should focus on this quarter, and you start to put them onto your 2x2 matrix. Post-it notes are fantastic for this, but however you want to do it, and if you're doing this online, then there are tools like Miro and 100 other tools that allow you to do this on a digital whiteboard. Plenty of tools out there. So you start putting them up there. Post-it notes and digital tools are great because you can move them around. Because what will happen is somebody will put one up, and then you'll have a discussion, and now it needs to go down a bit or to the right a bit, and so you're now moving them around. And what you want to do is you want to force a stack ranking so that no two post-it notes are on the same horizontal and no two post-it notes are on the same vertical. No two items can have the same negative impact or the same risk. And so you might start to put them up like this, but as you discuss, what you have to do is you're forced to move them around a bit through discussions that you have, and just make sure that nothing is on the same parallel. And this allows you to clearly see what it is that you should focus on this quarter. You might have 10 ideas, you might have 5 ideas. Most companies would generally pick 3 priorities to work on per quarter, but that's highly determined by how many staff you have and what the capacity is to execute. Better that you choose one priority and get it done, and that it's a really important, significant chunk of work and you get it done, then pick 3 priorities and 2 of them get junked mid-quarter and the other one just kind of ended up being a bit meh and being a bit of a weak execution. So you have to be very clear on your capacity and what resources are required in order to execute on these as well. I often see companies saying, well, we'll do 5, we're high performers. But even in bigger companies, it tends not to work out, because the size of the priorities are inherently bigger in bigger companies. 3, usually the sweet spot. Small businesses, take 1 or 2. I would rather everybody execute on 1 big priority every quarter than have a go at 3 and have the disappointment of failing at 2 of them anyway. But that's a resource allocation question for you to solve. Once we've chosen our priorities, we then plan them out. We then need to plan out the priority. It's not enough to choose what we're going to focus on. We have to plan it out in detail. And something that I very rarely see companies do is plan it out in detail and then re-review whether it was the right priority at all. Because in the planning, you uncover much more information that you didn't have when you were just ideating and talking about it on a whiteboard. So planning is not final. Planning could just be planning out more priorities than you plan to execute on and then choosing between them because you have more clarity through the planning. And the purpose in the planning process is to drive more clarity on what you're going to execute on for the quarter. It doesn't mean that you can't backtrack and change your mind, because the planning process itself will give you more clarity. Or what some companies would do, and you'll see as we go through this 6-step planning process, is maybe just do the first few steps to get some more clarity and then go back to the whiteboard and then think about, actually now we're thinking it's something else. Or we really haven't got the resources to do that, so it's just not viable. So the first step of a 6-step planning process is, first of all, simply to write down what the solution is going to be, what the title is. This is really just giving a title to the page, but what the final goal is going to be, what it is that you had written down on your sticky note, what it is that you're aiming for. Then we want to come down, there's one block to the top right of that on your worksheets, which has the letters AP in it. AP stands for accountable person. So when you're filling this in, this isn't one of my 6 steps, but that's accountable person. So who is accountable for executing this? It may not be the person that's going to do all of the work, hopefully not. Then we'll have other people responsible for a variety of tasks, but who is accountable for carrying this priority across the line? So that's accountable person. So we've written what our solution is. Step 2 is to get very clear about the outcomes. How are we going to measure when we cross the finish line? If you want to run a 4-minute mile, you need to know that when you look to the left as you cross the finish line, it says 3:59 on the clock. That's a measurable outcome. So how can we be absolutely clear about what the outcome is going to be? And yes, Roger Bannister did mentally practice and rehearse in his mind seeing 3:59 on the clock when he ran the 4-minute mile in 1954. Segue. Okay, step 3, what are the performance gaps? So where do our current performance or skills not measure up? This is like a mini gap map exercise, is to actually get clear about what the distance is between your start point and your end point, and where your performance and perhaps your skills are lacking, so that we can make sure we build the right solution to cross that gap. It's not enough to simply say we're going to shoot for the moon without realizing that, well, it's actually a really long way, and once we leave the atmosphere, there are some challenges that we don't have at this level, etc., etc., etc. So we want to be clear on what the performance gaps are in the business today, so that we can be clearer about how we're going to cross that chasm in our execution. Step 4 is to think about the resources that are going to be required not only to execute on the outcomes that are above box 4 and box 2, but also how we're going to bridge those performance gaps that are in box 3. You have 3 resources in business: time, money, and people. But you may also require other things, help from other people, systems, funding, all sorts of things. It usually just boils down to time, money, and people. And the time thing is important, because if you don't make sure that you've got the time resource this quarter, even a perfectly planned out priority will sadly fail because you didn't have the time. So we want to be clear about what the resource requirement is in order to execute this. Step 5 is to do a risk analysis. What are we assuming here? What are the unknowns? What are the critical success factors? What are our assumptions? What could go wrong? Better to do a pre-mortem rather than be doing a post-mortem a quarter later when you've failed. What could trip us up here? Ask that question with your team. And this is where more minds will really help. We think, well, that could go wrong, and that's failed before, and that's really uncertain, and doing that is risky. So we want to do a risk assessment up front so that we're going into it with our eyes open. And once we've done those 5 steps, step 6 is to actually break down the priority into its individual milestones. Now, milestones could be, if many of you do project work, it could be just planning out the project steps. It could be building a Gantt chart. It could be thinking about what the deliverables are week by week by week. So you maybe have 12 or 13 steps. It could be any of those and all of those. But it's breaking it down into achievable milestones, because when you come to the accountability piece, which is your weekly meeting, when you're reviewing the performance of these priorities, what will you be reviewing against? How do you hold people accountable? The reason we have big accountability problems is because we don't have the mirror to hold up against the performance. But with this detailed plan, we have the clear outcomes, and the milestones are the mirror as our accountability tool to hold up week by week by week in ensuring that we are staying on track.